All right, welcome back, everybody. We are in the shop here, and in front of us we've got some rally struts, and we've got Tasso from OTC Racing here with us. Now, the reason is because the Cusco coilovers that Tasso's been running on his rally car that he had an unfortunate accident in have now been back from being rebuilt. And so we wanted to kind of go through what was found or was not found in the process of rebuilding them. And now that we've had a little bit more time, or you've had a little bit more time to run them, kind of talk about some impressions about where these Cuscos are a good application and what some of the differences are between basically these Cusco Zero 3Gs and something like a full-on rally suspension like these RSNSPs that we run on our rally car.
Yeah, so I think the last time I was in here we talked about these, we were just in the early stages, right?
Yeah.
I hadn't run them yet, so
Right.
the short answer is that they've been great. Especially for the price point of these things, they are, 9.9 tenths out of what is even available in the suspension market. Obviously the factory setups will be so far above kind of what we have on the table here, but they're also so far above what we have on the table in terms of price. So
Yeah.
especially for the price point, these things are out of this world. They've proven to be plenty strong, and some of the stuff we'll talk about here is kind of to that point. But also, immediately just had an increase in speed, and then just better times, like right away. Just back to back, one to the other.
Yeah.
The suspension made a positive improvement. So
They took a reasonable amount of abuse and performed really well, and then they took a ton of abuse. And the coolest thing when we sent these off to be rebuilt, I mean, honestly, it was a question on I think one or maybe two of the struts whether they were even going to be able to be rebuilt, just because of how substantial the impact was. So that Tasso, your car rolled 3.5 times.
Yeah, like 3.5 times, and a couple of those in the air, like full on Ricky Bobby.
Yeah.
But even before that, we still saw a decent amount of rally abuse out of these
Yeah.
things. Obviously there are tougher. There's always going to be someone that says, "Oh, yeah, that's nothing compared to my road," or something like that. But
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, I bounced off a wall. We've done some sweet jumps. We've shoved them into potholes.
Yeah.
We've bounced up into the air off of bumps and stuff like that. And to all that stuff, they held up great. No complaints.
So
absolutely straight.
When Cusco took a look at them, nothing was bent. Everything was straight. All of them were still holding their full nitrogen charge, so none of them had any damage to the point where any seals were compromised and the pressure in the strut had leaked. The oil looked perfect, and there was no signs of substantial impact to any of the bump stops, so we weren't bottoming them out. They were basically working as expected, and especially considering the impact from the roll, which was severe enough to actually completely shear the ears off of this front bracket. Pretty impressed that they held together as well as they did. So I think basically crash tested and Tasso approved at this point.
Yeah. The impact that finally did them damage was a significant enough impact that throughout the chassis and the subframes, there were bent parts and blown apart stuff. I mean, the transmission case cracked was how hard this impact was. So the fact that the suspension has what is a replaceable part that needed to be replaced, and that was it, right?
And
that's kind of what we found.
And talking to Cusco, I mean, this is in the case of a roll or something like that where you have a really substantial impact. They know that this is going to be the part that fails, and I guess one of the nice things with a coilover that does have this type of adjustability is you can just replace this piece versus having to replace an entire housing on, say, a more traditional or a higher level rally suspension.
It's worth saying this impact also shattered the brake rotor and broke that brake caliper and broke every part of that corner of the car as well. So the fact that even the strut that this was installed onto is still good to go. It still was holding its full nitrogen tight charge there. That's pretty impressive. So that's a proof of durability on these things that way exceeds their already crazy good performance at that price point.
Yeah.
So
the price point, these are on our site right now for $3,500, and that's the complete set of 4. It does not include top hats, but that does include the struts and the springs. And I feel like that's a pretty darn good value for basically what is an intro to moderate level rally suspension. But since we've got a full rally suspension in front of us here with these, where is this going to be the best application? Where would you actually want to look into something like a Riders or something like that, a full stage rally suspension. What are your thoughts?
So I would say that until you get to the price point that includes a hydraulic bump stop, there's really no performance advantage in going with anything else. And those hydraulic bump stops, we're talking 5-digit price tags, right? Or more.
Well, yeah, I mean, Rigers without the hydraulic bump stops start, I think, around 6,500, and then with the hydraulic bump stops, I want to say they're like 7,500,
Okay.
something like that.
So that's even more, but that's still more than twice the price of what these are for. What is only really going to be an advantage to you if you're consistently, 11/10ths pushing and bouncing off those bump stops, because it just makes for a more controlled bottom.
Yeah.
These do have just a elastomer style bump stop in there, like I think these RS and SPs do as well.
Yes. Yeah. Until you get to the hydraulic, it's basically just a
the same thing that you would
Pulling
find
and
on
pushing,
any
yeah.
strut from a Geo Metro up to a somewhat nationally competitive rally car. So, but other than that, I have no qualms about running these things. Up till that point, right? There's the breakover to increase in performance on these things comes with such an insane increase in price tag. I would argue that if you're the kind of person that's wondering what kind of suspension you need, you probably don't need a hydraulic bump stop.
Right.
If you need a hydraulic bump stop, you probably have a deal for one.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it. So.
Well, and I think the point that I would say is that these Cuscos are it is a gravel suspension. There's a lot of travel. It's basically a 15 millimeter strut. So it really ticks a lot of the boxes for an entry level rally suspension. And now we know that they're very durable, and we know that we like the valving and so forth. And it's at a good price point for that kind of a suspension. The advantage you get with something like these RS and SPs or Riders or something like that, where basically you just have the spring perch that's adjustable, is the strut is going to be a little bit longer still. So you're going to have a little bit more travel still with these, a Riders or something like that. So if you would start to run into the point, when you're doing stage rally where you really do need that extra travel, you start bottoming out more, that might be an indicator. The other thing is if you start to see signs like you're running a lot of long stages, like probably, because what's your longest hill climb?
5 miles ish is our longest hill climb. So that's for the folks that don't know why there are remote reservoirs on shocks, that is why. It gives you that extra oil volume and that extra heat sink for all that to get that heat out of the shock.
And a little bit of adjustability as well. So I mean, if you're doing full stage rally and you're doing 10 to 15 mile stages, and you will be running something like this non-external reservoir strut here, and towards the end of the rally, the car starts to get a little bit bouncy or something like that. You feel like the valving's a little bit off. That would be kind of an indicator that you would need something with an external reservoir, a greater oil volume. But you're probably going to be pushing pretty hard and going pretty fast when you get to that point. And you've got to basically get the car out and get a handful of rallies under your belt to be able to develop that speed. So, these Cuscos, I think it's a really good entry to mid-tier rally suspension, and I feel good about the product and the price point that it came in at. I mean, we've talked about, you can actually have 2 complete sets of these for about the purchase price of one set of like a Riders or something like that at this point. So sometimes having a complete spare set, there's an advantage to that.
There is. I've already lent out my spare suspension to other folks.
Yeah,
so
things happen in rally.
It happens, and that's the community part of it. But yeah, there's something definitely to be said about. Once you get into that a few $1,000s price range, it feels like what's a few more. But when you put a scale to it like that, it really kind of brings that home.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind is like even these top tier suspensions, they can get damaged and can need to be rebuilt. In fact, that's why we have these off of our cars, that they need to get sent out for rebuild, because we had an off a while back that basically compressed one of the struts and damaged it. So, these, the Cuscos or the Rigers or anything else, like if you're rallying it, if you're really using it, it's probably going to need to be gone through. And so having a spare set, that's not a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning too. The Cuscos just went back to California to get checked. Right, they didn't have to go back to Japan or some crazy shipping situation or some motorsports outfit in Europe or something like that. They just went back to Southern California, where the engineers went through them and were able to give them a clean bill of health.
Yeah,
so
in fact, they even had the brackets on hand, so it was actually a pretty quick rebuild process. So all in all, it's a good option, and glad that it's worked well. And Tasso is working basically right now, more or less, on the new shell.
Mhm.
And so these should be going on to that, and hopefully gonna get out there in competition here soon.
Mhm.
So, well, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully that helps answer some questions, give you more of an insight into what this Cusco Zero 3G rally suspension is all about. And until next time, as always, stay tuned to Flyers Tuning and check out OTC Racing. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Take care.